Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Validity Podcast. I'm your host, Valentina Rodriguez, and this is episode 11, which is so wild to me because we have officially gone through all the course content, or at least all the relevant course content from Dr. Campbell's Science of Physique Enhancement class that I helped facilitate last semester. So this week, we're going to start covering topics from other classes. And I would say that other courses I've taken aren't as directly applicable to things that might be pertinent or useful to you guys within your body composition, physique enhancement goals. The Science of Physique Enhancement course was directly everything was applicable. In my other courses, there's a lot of foundational physiology that would be really hard to do a full podcast episode on because a lot of the topics aren't necessarily research-based. They're textbook physiology, if that makes sense. But in the sports nutrition class that Dr. Campbell taught last semester, this is the one I just finished taking in the spring, we did have a lecture on nutrient timing. And that's what we're going to discuss today, not to be confused with the episode about optimal meal timing and meal frequency, because that episode was really all about how many times should you be eating a day and what is the pattern or predictability of your feeding behavior. This is specifically nutrient timing, as in does consuming carbs or protein or a combination of those immediately pre and or post workout make a difference. So this is more so peri-workout meal timing and peri-workout nutrition. And we're going to discuss it from a carbohydrate standpoint, protein standpoint, both endurance and resistance training. So it's not as long of an episode as it probably sounds like it's going to be. It's pretty to the point. So before we get into the science, we'll get into all the updates. So the world's first reverse dieting study that I'm leading as a part of Dr. Campbell's Performance and Physique Enhancement Lab is officially underway. Recruitment is open. So if you are interested in being a subject in the world's first reverse dieting study, please email reversedietstudy@gmail.com to get more information and receive some forms to determine your eligibility. As a part of this study, you will be expected to undergo a maintenance phase to reach 2 weeks of weight stability before undergoing a dieting phase where you will be on a pretty aggressive caloric deficit until you reach 5% of body weight loss, after which you will undergo your post-dieting strategy where you're randomized to one of 3 different post-dieting approaches to study the mitigation of weight regain after dieting. So that is the study in a nutshell. If you're interested, please reach out. All the information you need is linked into the description. When it comes to personal updates, it is Friday, but I don't get a refeed today like I do every other Friday because I actually have midweek check-ins with my coach tomorrow to kind of nail things in as we're getting potentially closer to a show. Everybody's asking me how many weeks out are you? And I'm like, girl, I don't even know, if I'm being honest. I still don't know how many weeks out I am, but we're potentially getting close to a physique that we could put on stage in some amount of time. So I have check-ins tomorrow and hopefully that will come with a refeed, but I did hit a new low today. I hit a new low yesterday. My body's responding. My protocol hasn't really changed since we got aggressive. I think we've dropped 10 carbs, but otherwise still on an hour of cardio, still doing the damn thing. I'm getting tired. I'm getting exhausted. I was given a impromptu rest day on Wednesday, still had to do cardio, but was instructed not to lift because my body was really going through it. And then I had a massage yesterday and new lows on new lows. So on the prep front, everything's going really well. New video going up on the YouTube for the prep series this weekend. So more updates to come on YouTube. So other than that, we're going to get into the science. So first and foremost, nutrient timing. Like I said, this isn't about how many times you should eat a day, and this isn't about the regularity of your feeding behavior or your feeding patterns. Nutrient timing is focused on when to eat and not just what to eat. This lecture focused on carbohydrate and protein surrounding your workout. And ultimately, we're asking the question, does it work? If you consume protein and or carbs before your lifts, before your cardio, after your lifts, after your cardio, does it make a difference on body composition, on performance, on any metrics that might be of interest to us? So we're going to start off by looking at 2 overview studies just to kind of kick things off with what's out there. We're not going to go into crazy depth. This is just, like I said, overview. There was one study done on football players and powerlifters. They were resistance training 4 days a week, and they were given a protein supplement that contained 42 grams of protein, 3.6 grams of leucine specifically. And they were given that protein supplement either in the morning and in the evening or pre and post resistance training. and there was a control that did not receive the protein supplement at all. And what that study found was that there was no difference between strength, power, or body composition between the group consuming protein in the morning and the evening and in the group consuming protein pre and post workout. So this study is saying like, okay, it might not matter. I know this was kind of like the age-old question, like, is the anabolic window a thing? Is the anabolic window a myth? Do you have to like chug protein immediately post-workout? This study, at least this one specifically, is saying it might not matter. But we know, and if I haven't said this before, let it be known, that while I do think that protein timing in of itself specifically will be a whole different lecture. We're mostly looking at overview nutrient timing. I do think protein timing matters, but not more so than total protein daily intake. So let that be known. But all right, let's look at another study overview. This study had resistance trained males, and they were given a supplement, again, either in the morning and in the evening or pre and post workout. They were resistance training for 10 weeks, I think was the study. And the supplement that they were given contained protein, creatine, and glucose. And what they found was that the group consuming this protein, creatine, glucose supplement pre and post workout, pre and post resistance training, had significantly increased strength, lean muscle mass, and type 2 muscle fiber hypertrophy as measured by type 2 muscle fiber cross-sectional area. So we now have one study saying, hey, there's no difference if you supplement with protein in the morning and in the evening, or if you do it directly surrounding your resistance training session. And the other one is saying, actually, if you supplement directly surrounding your resistance training session, you get better strength, lean body mass, and type 2 fiber hypertrophy outcomes. So what do we take away from, like, just right off the bat, we have two contradictory studies. I've said it before. I literally said it last episode. I've said it multiple episodes. I'll say it again. Whenever you have a body of research that has some studies suggesting it's efficacious, whether that's a supplement, whether that's a feeding strategy, whether that's a training protocol, whatever you are looking at, whatever body of research you are considering, if there are some studies saying, hey, it works, there's some studies that are positive outcomes for whatever intervention you're looking at, and there are some neutral studies saying, hey, it actually makes no difference. But there are no studies saying, hey, it actually harms your outcomes, or it has side effects, or it has adverse effects. In this case, we don't have any studies saying that if you supplement with protein directly surrounding your resistance training, that it's actually going to harm your gains, that it's going to cause you to lose muscle, that it's actually catabolic, or that it's unhealthy for you. There's no research at all, does not exist, suggesting that. So we have some positive studies, some neutral studies. What does that leave us at? It leaves us at a net positive. So do we recommend supplementing with protein and or protein plus glucose plus creatine surrounding your training session? At least the way we discussed it in Dr. Campbell's class, we would recommend it because there is no harm and because there is still some evidence to support supplementing with protein surrounding your training window. And it is important to note that between these two studies, at least, in the study that showed a benefit, the supplement did contain protein and creatine and glucose. And for those of you who don't know, when you resistance train or exercise in general, exercise is a stimulus that causes the translocation of a transport protein called GLUT4 to the membrane of your muscle cells. And GLUT4 is responsible for uptaking glucose into the muscle cells. And you cannot uptake glucose unless GLUT4 is present on the cell membrane. And two of the stimuli that can cause GLUT4 translocation to the cell membrane, one is exercise, it's training, and the other one is insulin. So I do wonder if the second study saw a benefit and saw that nutrient timing was efficacious because that supplement contained glucose, and that meant that, you know, after training, when you have an upregulation of GLUT4 translocation, you're able to actually uptake. Also, glucose is insulinogenic, and that insulin is going to further upregulate your GLUT4 translocation. So I do wonder if it also had to do with the fact that you were able to shuttle more glucose into your muscles. But we can't make that distinction. We just have to kind of take it at face value. The supplement did contain protein, it contained creatine, and it contained glucose, and that's the study that found benefit. So if you are considering implementing a supplement pre and or post workout, I would personally choose one that has protein and creatine and glucose because that's the study that found the benefit. When we move on and we look at studies looking at endurance training, so cardio specifically, which is different than resistance training, and the science and the physiology is different, studies looking at adding protein to carbohydrate beverages showed no improvement in endurance performance. But there are still some studies that suggest there might be an improvement in endurance performance when you're consuming a protein and carb supplement or beverage before and or after cardio. However, the only studies that have shown benefit have been in time to exhaustion studies. And time to exhaustion just basically means run or cycle or conduct whatever endurance exercise modality is being used in the study until you cannot anymore. So it's not like their mile time improved. It's not like their VO2 max improved. It's not like more applicable metrics of endurance performance improved. It's specifically time to exhaustion. And I think that's because within a certain intensity range, your exhaustion is directly proportionate to your muscle glycogen stores. So if you're supplementing with carbs, you might be increasing your glycogen stores and therefore increasing your time to fatigue. But in general, we talk about time to exhaustion or time to fatigue. It's just an inferior metric because that's not how athletes compete. Like when you have a basketball player, you don't measure their ability to play basketball by like just play indefinitely and the last person standing wins the game, like until you physically give out fatigue, exhaust. No, it's about reaction times. It's about speed. It's about agility. And none of these metrics are necessarily shown to be improved with a protein and carbohydrate beverage pre or post endurance training. But what has been shown is that adding protein to a carbohydrate beverage post-workout is beneficial because it suppresses muscle damage and soreness. So nearly every single study, and this is a claim that Dr. Campbell literally said is so rare in science, and it really is. Like you rarely have this much consensus across the literature, but nearly every single study done on protein post-exercise, both endurance and resistance training, whether that's protein or a carbohydrate protein supplement, drink, whatever, protein ingestion improves muscle damage and or feelings of soreness in the hours or days following exercise. And the recommendation for this is 0.25 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight every hour post-exercise to suppress damage and soreness. And you don't have to do this every hour. This is especially applicable for like multi-sport athletes, multi-competition athletes, athletes who are training multiple times a day, competing multiple times a day. That's when, you know, the like every hour post-workout is going to be more important. But consuming protein post-workout or protein carbs post-workout is almost guaranteed, at least according to nearly all the studies that have shown this, to reduce your muscle soreness and reduce your muscle damage. And there's one specific study done on Marines, I believe, and it's called Post-Exercise Protein Supplementation Improves Health and Muscle Soreness During Basic Military Training in Marine Recruits. And the study is really showing the power of just minimal protein intake on these metrics of soreness and of performance and of all these things. So they had 387 U.S. Marine recruits. They were randomly assigned to ingest supplements immediately after exercise during their 54-day basic training period. The placebo group received nothing. They received a placebo, but it contained nothing. 0 carbs, 0 fat, 0 protein. The control group were given a supplement. Again, all of these are given immediately post-workout, and it was blinded, so no one knew what they were getting. The control group received a supplement that contained 8 grams of carbs, 3 grams of fat, and 0 grams of protein. The protein group received a supplement immediately post-training that contained 8 grams of carbs, 3 grams of fat, and 10 grams of protein. 10 grams of protein is so minimal. So if we do see a difference between this protein group and the other two, because it's essentially comparing 10 grams of protein post-workout to 0, then clearly even a little protein goes a long way. And what it found was exactly that. The protein group lost more fat mass and retained the greatest amount of lean mass over the 54 days. And it wasn't statistically significant, but it was still present. It was still, I would say, practically significant. Compared to the placebo and the control groups, the group that supplemented with protein, again, just 10 grams, had 33% fewer total medical visits, 28% fewer visits due to infections, 37% less due to muscle and joint problems, and 83% fewer visits due to heat exhaustion. So clearly, even just 10 grams of protein post-workout is helping some form of recovery and of overall general health. The last metric, and I think really, really important, was that the protein group significantly improved their muscle soreness scores compared to the control and the placebo groups. So their perceived muscle soreness was significantly decreased in the protein group, which just goes to support that supplementing with protein, even if it's just 10 grams, even the minimal amount, even 10 grams of protein post-exercise is going to have profound benefits on your health, on your fat mass, and on your perception of muscle soreness, which is going to translate into just overall better performance and overall better quality of life. So this study really points to, okay, even a little bit of protein post-workout goes a long way, and it's definitely a preferred strategy to no protein at all. So that's protein and carb on muscle damage and soreness. Now we're going to look at glycogen resynthesis. So a lot of times people talk about supplementing with carbohydrates immediately post-workout in order to increase muscle glycogen resynthesis rates, because you break down muscle glycogen, you use it when you're training, and you don't typically deplete it all the way in a typical resistance training program. I know that you only really decrease your muscle glycogen stores by around 33% after a full resistance training session, but still you want to replenish that at some point. And what we talk about is that for most athletes, resynthesizing depleted skeletal muscle glycogen does not need to be a priority, because whether you want to believe it or not, skeletal muscle glycogen stores are not a limiting factor to your resistance training performance. They can affect your endurance exercise. They can affect your cardio performance within a certain intensity range, which I believe is around 60 to 80% of your VO2 max. Within that intensity, your time to exhaustion and your time to fatigue is directly proportional to your muscle glycogen stores. So for cardio, it is a limiting factor if you have depleted muscle glycogen. However, for resistance training, skeletal muscle glycogen does not seem to be a limiting factor in your resistance training performance. And therefore, for most athletes, glycogen resynthesis is really not a priority. It's not a limiting factor. And your daily carbohydrate intake is typically sufficient for resynthesizing those stores. So if you're getting enough carbs in your day, your glycogen resynthesis is basically taken care of. And some considerations for glycogen resynthesis that affect this are the type of carbohydrates that you're consuming, the timing, and the quantity. But so long as your daily carbohydrate intake is in a good place, your glycogen resynthesis is set. And the last question that we asked was, okay, does adding protein to post-workout carbs affect your rate of muscle glycogen resynthesis? And while there is conflicting data, the best studies show no effect on muscle glycogen resynthesis with the addition of protein. However, if you add protein to your post-workout carbs, it will still help with soreness. So we still recommend adding protein to your post-workout supplement ingestion of whatever you're consuming, because it will help with muscle soreness. So the majority of studies that have been done on nutrient timing, glycogen resynthesis, like everything we've discussed, soreness, most of those have been done on endurance exercise. So when we're looking specifically at resistance training, carbohydrate and protein intake during or after resistance training is superior to only consuming carbs or only consuming protein during or after your resistance training. Let me repeat that. Carbohydrate and protein intake during or after resistance training is superior to only carbs or to only protein after or during your training. The benefits of a carbohydrate and protein intake during or after your resistance training is greater gains in lean body mass, greater increases in muscle fiber cross-sectional area, so hypertrophy, and a suppression of muscle protein breakdown. So after you train, we've talked about this before, you have muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. And there's a net muscle protein balance, which is the ratio of synthesis, MPS, to breakdown, MPB. And you upregulate your muscle protein breakdown after you train. And in order to suppress that upregulation, because you want to be in a net positive, you want muscle protein synthesis to be greater than muscle protein breakdown in order to be in an overall anabolic state. In order to suppress that upregulated muscle protein breakdown after training, protein suppresses that. In this case, carbohydrate and protein consumption is superior for suppressing that muscle protein breakdown. So what is it about carbohydrates post-resistance training? It increases your insulin secretion, and insulin actually suppresses your muscle protein breakdown. So post-exercise carbohydrate consumption will increase your insulin and suppress your muscle protein breakdown. What does protein do after training? It increases your muscle protein synthesis. So you have carbs on one front causing the secretion of insulin that's going to suppress your muscle protein breakdown. You have protein on the other front actually increasing your muscle protein synthesis. So if you combine carbs and protein after your resistance training, you kind of have a double whammy. And carbohydrate and protein intake after resistance training has been shown to increase your lean body mass over time. A caveat is that the studies that reported this were done in non-resistance training populations, but that's the evidence that we have, and so that's evidence that we should go off of. And like I said, there's no harm reported. There's no detriment reported. There's nothing reporting that consuming carbs and proteins after your resistance training is going to harm your gains. And there is some studies suggesting that it's going to help your gains. So ultimately, I would always recommend it. The last study that we're going to look at is called The Effects of Nutrient Timing on Training Adaptations in Resistance-Trained Females. And this is an interesting study because it was the only one done on females and on resistance-trained females specifically. It's by P. Hoker et al. It was published in 2019, so fairly recent. And what they did is they had 43 resistance-training females. They put them into 3 groups. The control group did nothing. The pre-group consumed a supplement within 15 minutes of resistance training, so 15 minutes before, and the post group consumed a supplement within 15 minutes after resistance training, so a control group, a pre-group, and a post group. And this study was 6 weeks long, and all 3 groups were resistance training. They were given 6 exercises, training 3 sets of 6 to 10 reps at 80% of their 1 rep max, and the last set was taken to failure. So it's a pretty comprehensive, adequately stimulating resistance training program that all subjects were on. And the only thing that was different between the groups was whether they received a supplement and whether that supplement was given pre or post. And the specific supplement that was given was 200 calories. It contained 16 grams of carbs, 25 grams of protein, and 3.5 grams of fat. So the control group did not receive that. The pre-group had it 15 minutes before their training. The post-group had it 15 minutes after their training. They measured everything using a DEXA, and they looked at also maximal strength. And what they found was that if you compared the pre and the post-group to each other, or the pre-group to the control, or the post-group to the control, there were no differences in lean body mass gains between the groups. But if you combine the pre and the post group, so you look at all subjects that were given the supplement either before or after, you combine them and you compared those to the subjects that were not given the supplement at all, there was a difference of lean body mass gains of 1.76 pounds for the subjects given it pre or post versus only 0.33 pounds for the control group. So that is a difference of 1.43 pounds. So if you combine the women that were in the pre and the post groups, they gained on average 1.43 more pounds of lean body mass, of muscle, than the group who did not receive the supplement at all. And when it comes to strength, the nutrient timing groups, so either the pre or the post, saw significant increases in their bench press max strength specifically. So looking at this study, it does require like secondary statistical analysis in order to elucidate the differences. But if you are looking at the nutrient timing groups combined as a whole, then they did see significantly greater increases in lean body mass. And they were consuming this supplement that contained carbs and protein and a tiny bit of fat, either 15 minutes directly before or directly after their training session. So that's the last study that we looked at in this lecture. And all in all, the biggest thing to take away is that you should be supplementing with a carbohydrate and protein supplement or meal or beverage or something containing carbs and protein pretty soon after your lift. Is there definitive evidence saying this is going to make you bigger? This is going to cause a significant increase in hypertrophy? Not necessarily. But we know that it's going to improve your muscle soreness, decrease your muscle damage, decrease your muscle protein breakdown, increase your muscle protein synthesis, and according to this study, this last one, potentially actually increase your overall lean body mass gains. We know that that's been proven in non-trained individuals, and now we're seeing it in resistance-trained females. So again, some neutral evidence, some positive evidence. As a whole, do I think carbohydrate and protein nutrient timing matters, specifically when it comes to that peri-workout window? Yes, I actually really do. So that's what I'm going to leave you guys with. I'm going to wrap up the episode here and get to the research meeting. As always, if you're interested in being a subject, please email reversedietstudy@gmail.com. If you are interested in anything else, have any questions, you can email me at thevaliditypodcast@gmail.com. DM any of my Instagrams. Everything is linked below in the description. Keep an eye out for my next YouTube video for my prep series. And other than that, thank you guys so much for listening. I am just so grateful for this community. I cannot say that enough. Seriously, like from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. And I will see you in the next one.